So welcome to this presentation on fast bowling. I'm going to try and go through the technical points that I think are really important and try and explain them in a way that is comprehensible to kind of the common coach, your level twos that are trying to improve any fast bowling from kind of 11 years old till the adult game. So these are the parts of bowling that I think are important. You've got the run up and the 3 Ps, which I'll talk about. The back foot contact and some of the differences that different techniques will have. We're going to talk about stiffness, rotational power, the speed bolt position, front foot contact, and bowling fast. So these are the things that I've picked out. There are more points, and again, this is just my ideas around what I would look to change. So conversations that have shaped this presentation. I think Sam talked to me about this in November 2019, and he gave me lots and lots of points which I've tried to use my own education and kind of grow what he said into something that's tangible for me. James Kirtley's the fast bowling coach at Sussex. We've had many chats around what we think is in this presentation. Stephen Jones is kind of putting out lots and lots of great content around the things that are going to be talked about today. Paul Felton did a fantastic webinar, which I really recommend you checking out, about fast bowling on YouTube. And Alex Natera is kind of the leading in isometrics, and that's going to come up in this presentation today. I've tried to look at as many research papers as I can. I've probably only got around to 10% of them. There's so many which are fantastic, but I've kind of tried to pick out some that are really important, mainly from Loughborough and some from Australia and things like that. But a lot of this presentation is kind of my own theories from what I've seen whilst coaching and in the gym. And it's definitely not all correct, and I'll look back at it in 5 years' time and think, yeah, I don't think I quite got that right, or there might be some new research to say that I haven't got that right, but I'm just trying to call what I can see and trying to provide training interventions to benefit them. My background is in strength and conditioning and cricket coaching. I've cricket coached at Sussex for 3 years or so, but been working in cricket coaching for 6, 7, 8 years. And my S&C background extends to going through university and then passing my accreditation a couple of years ago. So the definition of fast bowling is the job of a fast bowler is to force the batsman into a full shot using pace, swing or seam that will result in a wicket or a low scoring shot. The faster the delivery, the less time the batsman has to make a decision. And it's really important to gauge why it's important for bowling and to be fast, because you don't see many average pace bowlers. You have got some with incredible skill, but even those ones are still bowling around 130 k's an hour. If you have a look at the top 10 in the test rankings for bowling at the moment, they're all pace, and some of them are extreme pace, looking at 150 k's an hour up to 160. And the aim is to always hit top of off and be consistent ball after ball. There's no good bowling one ball at 165 or 160, 155, 95 miles per hour if you can't land it on the spot ball after ball, because batsmen are just too good to put that away. So main two things is being consistent, hitting the top of off, and having raw pace. I've tried to make this presentation as video light as possible. However, there are a few, just to put my point across a little bit better. But the body is a series of segments put together. We've got levers put together, moved by muscles and tendons, which create torque around different joints, creating force on a ball, and that creates a resultant velocity. I just want to show you a little video about conserving and creating momentum. And
momentum is defined as a product of the mass times velocity. conservation of momentum, that's also generally defined as the linear momentum in a closed system remains constant when no external forces are involved. This is best demonstrated with a Newton's cradle. This little device of suspended steel spheres is generally known as a Newton's cradle. They're all the same size and mass. We're going to give it a little try here, a little push. It's great for showing the conservation of momentum. As you can see, the velocity and movement is transferred through the center spheres to the one on the other end. If we push two of them at a time, it does a similar effect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a video.
So there's a really good description of the conservation of momentum. So momentum isn't lost, it's converted into different means. And if there's a tapered mass,
transfer momentum from one side to the other,
you'll see a big difference in how the smaller balls move, which have less mass. So a considerable difference there, and what I want you to think about is that your run-up is the first ball, your hips, the second ball, shoulder, third ball, arm, elbow, wrist, and then ball at the end. So anything that we do proximally, so right at the start of that kinetic chain, is going to have massive effects on the end of it. So this is all going to be about kind of foot contacts and using our body to its best, using our body to be most efficient at the things at the largest, and that will dictate our wrist position and all this stuff that we might see people focus on initially. So I'm going to go from the ground up, whereas other people might go from the wrist down.
Momentum.
So looking at the creating momentum, the bowler starts here, starts running up, and they gain momentum through that period. Once they've gained the momentum, they then hit back foot contact. They try and maintain their momentum through back foot contact, rearranging the body into its delivery stride. They will then hit front foot contact and brake as hard as they can. This braking then converts into angular momentum, and they'll also use muscle contribution to create speed on the ball and velocity on the ball. This will result in a fast delivery coming out at around 135 k's an hour, depending on who they are and what strength they have. Not quite strength, but the way that they conserve momentum through that delivery. And it's just a nice picture to show gain momentum, maintain momentum, convert the momentum. And that's all fast bowling is. So I definitely wanted to start with developing linear momentum. It's at the start of the run-up, it makes sense to focus on it first. So to develop linear momentum, we first should resist lateral motion and momentum. Anything that goes left and right isn't going to be beneficial for our bowlers. So a direct run-up is the first port of call. If we ever see someone snaking, we're going to straighten them up. And this is just two diagrams where they've got a little bit wider or a little bit straighter, but they're still running straight. I hope these videos will play okay for you. So that's the bowler running sideways, and then we've just used two different constraints to get the bowler running straight. So preventing this sideways motion and then creating a constraints-based approach to get the athlete running straight. And that's going to help us develop linear momentum. And we don't want to start with anything else really. We've now got Chris Wokes, and I just want to look at the run-up and what the run-up entails. It's a really nice slow motion video. I hope that video played okay. But 3 words that I would use to describe his running style is relaxed, efficient, and rhythmical. So everything that he's doing, it's not forced. He's running at a good pace, but there's nothing that's forced in his action, and he's swinging the arms. Everything looks natural as the body should be moving. And he looks like an athlete. So these next few slides are going to be all about how to run like an athlete, run like Bolt. And if we can get our bowlers running in like athletes, we're going to be in a much better position to create linear momentum. But why is speed important? Faster run-ups have consistently led to greater ball velocities in lots and lots of research. And this is in line with our momentum model presented at the start. Stronach and lots of other papers have found that from a strength and conditioning perspective, if you can move faster in the run-up, you're going to have a bigger deceleration, the faster the ball release is going to be. And sprinting is all about controlling collisions with the ground, and this is going to have a transfer between creating linear momentum and maintaining momentum. So anytime that if we can get better at our running and controlling our action whilst we sprint, that's also going to have a benefit to our back foot contact. So why increase top speeds? In theory, we could just run up faster. So in this first one, in our control, this is our max velocity in the blue bars. Our orange is our run-up speed, and it's around 70% of our run-up speed. And you can see our ball velocity is here. We could just run up faster. Most bowlers aren't running at their max velocity, but this is going to lead us with a lot of consistency, and we might not be able to actually maintain those forces through back foot and front foot contact, and therefore will result up in a slower ball speed. These next two, we actually increased our max velocity. So through sprint training over a number of weeks and years, we've increased our max velocity. And now when we run at the same percentage of our top speed, we've increased our ball speed. But we've not lost any control that we had beforehand, because we're still running at the same speed. We have that physical component. We have the underpinning physiology to run in and bowl that fast. And we then have a faster ball speed. The other option is actually to not bowl faster. We're happy at how we're bowling. We've got movement, and we don't necessarily think that actually running up fast is going to improve our skills. So what we can do is just bowl at the same speed that we were before, same run up that we were before, and we're going to be able to bowl for longer because there's going to be less fatigue because we're hitting less of our max velocity. This has been found to 20-meter sprint speed in bowlers has also been found to correlate with ball velocity. And another benefit is that regular controlled bouts of high-speed running reduces the chance of injury. So if we could actually practice getting faster, the same kind of biomechanical the same training adaptations that make us faster are also going to reduce the chance of hamstring tears, and which is one of the leading injuries in fast bowlers. I don't want to talk about too much about injury in this presentation because there's a lot of them. So what is speed and how can we create it? So hitting the right positions with the right power and having the right pattern is going to increase our speed. So first thing we're asking is, can they hit the right positions? And then do they have the prerequisite strength and reactive strength to achieve these positions? Remembering that muscles guide the joints so that our tendons can be elastic. So when our muscles move, they move our tendons into the right position, they move our bones into the right position so that the floor can just hit and the tendons can be nice and elastic. And do they run with rhythm? Is it balanced? So the 3 P's of acceleration and our position. So we've got me there just sprinting off. And our key body postures are this forward lean of around 45 degrees. We've got a big arm split, so that arm's going right back, and then the other one's coming right forward. We've got a knee drive and our heel is quite low. Again, I'm not expecting the coaches who listen to this to become experts in teaching sprints. However, it's good to know these postures so that we can all improve our knowledge around the area. So some of the drills that we can use are like falling starts or med ball push accelerations, which we'll go over later. But the principles are that if we want to go that way, we need to push that way. So just creating force in the opposite direction so that we move in the direction we want to go. Power and pattern. So we need large amounts of force unilaterally and quickly. So in the gym, we're going to be focusing on concentric strength, looking at squats, lunges, RDLs. So this is looking through our basic patterns of movement on 2 and 1 legs. There's also a triple extension component in acceleration. So we're going to look to work on cleans and snatches, jumps in the gym. And a good exercise for practicing that pattern, practicing that forward lean with intent is a med ball push acceleration. So you can see real intent, and that's the best way to improve acceleration is through this intent. The pattern is driven by the switch of the legs, and there should be a knee cross at foot contact. As that left foot strikes, we're looking for that right knee to be in line or in front. And you can see mine's just behind. But essentially, pattern is made easier by pushing in harder into the floor. You need the faster and the harder you push into the floor, the more time you're going to give your recovery leg to swing through. And that's going to be the best way to do it. So top speed, the positions for top speed. At toe off, we've got this kind of bent leg. So we're not looking for triple extension. It's more of a bent leg. And we're upright and the sternum leads the movement. Anyone who's kind of like hunched over, and we'll see lots of them, they're not giving themselves the best opportunity to recover the leg to allow it to optimally be positioned and strike the floor again. And that's all we're looking to do, is strike the floor in the optimal position. At ankle cross, we want a high heel recovery. What you would have seen in acceleration is quite a low heel skimming along the floor, ready to be positioned again. In this instance, we're trying to produce vertical velocity. So that heel is going to come up, strike the floor, come back, strike the floor. And the high heel recovery is the perfect way to do that. At ground contact, again, we're looking for that opposite knee is in line or in front. And these ground contacts are really fast. They're under 100 milliseconds. But that knee switch is vital. And again, the harder we hit the floor, the more we're going to go up in the air, the longer the stride length, the easier it's going to be to recycle that leg. A couple of drills that we can do is dowel rod runs, so running with the stump above our head, and that's going to push off chest forward and making sure our head stays back. The power is having the correct impulse, so impulse is force over time, and can we have force times time, and the ground contact times are 100 milliseconds. So we need really fast ground contact times, large amounts of force in short amounts of time. This lends itself to a tendon-driven activity. So the muscles join onto the tendons, and that can move the joint. But this muscle will almost stay the same length, and the tendon will be acting as an elastic band, like giving up elastic energy with eccentric strength. To practice this, we can use isometrics and drop jumps. And then for our pattern, to practice that switch, we can use switches, hurdles, and straight leg run to bleed. The main intervention to run fast is quite like fast bowling, it's to run fast. So making sure we're just sprinting at least 2 times a week, around 150 meters a session. You might split that up to an acceleration and a max velocity. But essentially, we're just trying to practice those top speed drills and then really have a go at running fast. So in this video, I've got myself accelerating really fast, but then losing speed towards the crease, just showing a lack of rhythm. And then I've got a few drills to kind of try and compensate for that. So this is the switches, and you can see that really fast co-contraction as the leg swings down, the other one swings up. Using the arms, knowing that the arms drive the movement. And then one of the best drills that we can do is the hurdles. And because these increase the impulse of which we hit the floor. And that's going to help us with that knee switch. Importantly, we want to have long rest periods, so we're always practicing at max velocity rather than continuously doing repeated sprints. That means that we're going to be fatigued and we're not going to have the correct energy storage, and that means that we're going to then run on slower, and our nervous system isn't going to adapt as fast or at all because we don't have that kind of really sharp neural impulse, and like the activation of that central nervous system isn't going to be as high. So we want to make sure we've got long rest periods. So just bringing this back to, you know, the run up, making sure we don't forget that we're cricket coaches, as well as trying to improve everyone physically. We want to make sure they're starting at the same point and they run directly towards the stumps. This sounds simple, but in some younger kids, this can be lost. Making sure they mark their run up and they don't just steam in from anywhere they want. Making sure they drive the arms back and down. So imagine you're trying to elbow someone behind you, and you might get them to actually just practice this without bowling, because sometimes they can find that with the ball and having to bowl, they can get confused. Are they in the correct position? So when they're accelerating, are they in a low position? And when they're at top speed, are they in a high position? And they only need to be accelerating for 5 to 7 steps, and they're going to be at the speed they need to be. But they really need to make sure they're in this position and then an upright position, so that when we create horizontal forces and vertical forces, we're doing it from the best position. And then this is kind of taken from long jump and triple jump, but their strides finish behind or at the popping crease. They don't run up to the popping crease and then try and bowl. It's a change of thinking in that I finish my run up and then I bowl at the popping crease. Whereas I feel like people run up to the line, look at the line, and then bowl, whereas that's going to lead to lots of inconsistencies in the run-up. But if they know they're just going to bowl and they're going to run up from 10 strides, then they know that every time they hit 10, they should be at the popping crease. And kids will make mistakes, but there's no need to try and punish people by saying you can't bowl no balls. It's just going to lead to bad patterns and inconsistencies. And I think it's much better to practice a run-up and get more consistent than try and put people under pressure. Obviously, when it comes to the game day, they might bowl some no balls, but this will be ironed out in time, I believe. So that section was all about creating momentum. So we're going to now talk about maintaining linear momentum. And this is all based around just trying not to lose momentum at back foot contact. This is where we leak energy. And as much as this can, some of the things in here get a little bit complicated, it doesn't need to be. All we're doing is creating momentum in the run-up and then trying not to lose as much of it as we can before ball release. So looking at this paper from Wormgore, we've already placed a lot of work into creating momentum. So we want to make sure we just keep that momentum going forward, as just mentioned. However, it is a more complicated stride. We've got to think that the body's rearranging itself to prepare to bowl. They're moving side on. They could be a front on bowler. The line's coming up. They know they're going to decelerate in a second. So there's a lot more going on in their head. But as you can see here, there's a 0.36 drop in speed at back foot placement. And if we can try and keep that, if we reduce that and made that faster, so we were at 5.6, 5.7 meters per second at ball release, would we bowl faster? And that's kind of the main thinking. And using our momentum model, you would think so, that we would be faster if we lost less momentum. So that's just demonstrating that. So I looked a lot for back foot ground contact times and forces that are associated with them. I had to go back to 20 years to find a Hurriendale and Hale study that measured back foot and front foot forces in fast medium bowlers. And I haven't seen one since. I'm sure they're out there. But what do these graphs show? So there's lateral movement. So we know that. We don't have to land just straight on and go forward. We can land and often we'll actually hit the outside edge of our foot and rock onto the inside. And that's just good practice for absorbing force. There's also a braking and propulsion phase. And this is different to front foot contact. So we hit our front foot hits and decelerates and then accelerates through to the next stage. Now, that means that we've got a rapid loading and unloading phase within a very fast ground contact time. And you can see it's around 200 milliseconds. And this is going to be including a stretch shortening cycle, which we'll talk about later. And we're going to need lots of tendon stiffness. We've also got a lot of force going through the forefoot. So usually when people land, they've just got the forefoot twisting on the forefoot or midfoot, and we've got 2,000 newtons, which is 2.37 times body weight of force going through that forefoot in 53 milliseconds. And this is a large amount of force. If you try to back squat 2.4 times your body weight in 53 milliseconds, just using your calf, you're never going to be able to do that. So it's really important to understand that this is a big force component and it's in a short amount of time. So we need to respect that and train individuals to be to have the necessary physiological underpinning. What do the world's best do? In javelin, the ground contact time on back foot are short to not lose momentum through back foot contact. So in a similar sport, not the same sport, but the similar sport, what was found was that this is the world record for javelin in '97, 89.06 meters, the Zelezny threw the javelin, and his rear foot stride, his back foot contact was half any of the other competitors, and he threw it the furthest. Might that have a correlation to resultant velocity? I don't know, but it seems like it's got something to do with it. But again, they're not more than 220 milliseconds, and they're they're more than 170 and less than 220. So in cricket, I think the same principle applies for back foot contact in fast bowling. Again, these are 10 of the fastest bowlers in the world, or past top 10, and there's a few extra. And they're all between 150 and 200 milliseconds. So fast ground contact times. There's no mucking about. So the model is to be stiff like a spring. Springs give fast, efficient energy, and they return back to their shape really fast. We don't want to be like a sponge, hit the ground, really collapse, and then not produce and lose lots of our momentum that we've just worked on the run-up creating. What do I mean by stiffness and having a fast back foot contact? So stiffness is the ability to resist deformation under force. In this example, we are the force. Okay, we are on top of our ground contact, and there are 3 phases of all muscle actions. We have the eccentric phase, as you can see here. The toe lands, and you can see that muscle really firing up with the tendon lengthening. And then there's an amortization phase, which is essentially the isometric phase of the contraction, where there's no movement. And then we've got our concentric phase, and this carries on for a little bit longer, but I haven't included those images. We've then got the same on the bottom. The toe touches. We've got that eccentric lengthening of the tendon, and then that muscle and tendon fires up and creates concentric energy. And this is what is called as a stretch shortening cycle. And we're going to talk about more of that and how to train it. So having the correct physiology, what do we need to have to be a fast ground contact? And are there people that have done this before? So like you've got the four horsemen of the West Indies. Did they have something that you might need to have for a fast ground contact time? There are gender differences. Women don't seem to bowl the same as men. And is that because of this fast ground contact time? And we're going to talk about that later. But what is clear is we do need a high reactive strength in back foot contact. And what's interesting is that it wasn't seen in the bilateral. So Ferros did a paper and they didn't find any correlation between back foot contact and ball velocity. But if we felt that having a reactive back foot contact was still important, then would we screen it? Could we use the reactive strength index on maybe a unilateral and under 200 milliseconds to find out if these individuals did have a fast back foot contact time and create larger impulse strides? So in this diagram at the top, we've got the contact time is how long you're on the floor, and the jump height is how far you've jumped up in the air. And these two measurements, essentially, if you can jump a very high height in not a long time on the ground, then you've got a high reactive strength index. However, if you could, and the individual that could, if you have two individuals that can jump 50 centimeters, and they do, but one does it in 200 milliseconds and one does it in 300, that individual who does the 200 milliseconds is going to have a much higher jump height, reactive strength index. And essentially they can use their eccentric component of the jump much more efficiently than the other individual. So how can we increase tendon stiffness? So a combination of plyometrics and isometrics can increase ankle stiffness. In British track cyclists with little to no experience of plyometrics, which I thought was an important comparison, especially with some of the kids at the Kingston Grammar School, we don't necessarily have lots of experience in plyometrics. So extensive low-level plyometrics are a good fit for us. And then isometrics are easy to administer. And these increased ankle stiffness. So as you can see, we've got a higher ankle stiffness than the control group and the experimental group. So this skipping 100 to 300 contacts 3 times a week, and then our isometric calf push 3 times a week from 3 to 10 seconds, increased stiffness. And so would that have an impact in our fast bowlers if they could then be stiffer on back foot contact, lose less momentum, and then create a higher resultant velocity? The principle is pretty simple. Increasing max force and then increasing efficiency is going to equal stiffness. So can we get that tendon to fire up efficiently? And can we get that muscular tendon joint creating lots and lots of force? Then can we access that faster for stiffness? So these two exercises here. So we've got our isometric calf push. This is a ratchet strap. You just attach it through here and it doesn't move. So you're trying to push up against an immovable force. So there you go, there's an isometric calf push. And then we've all seen skipping. We've got our skipping. And then it's just about finding the stiffness, and the amount of stiffness is going to be effective. We might not need full stiffness, and more stiffness we have, the higher chance of injury. So is there going to be a play-off between creating lots of stiffness and creating too much stiffness? Obviously, when we're fast bowling, we are falling here, which is called an isometric yield. So would that be more effective to actually use a yield rather than a push? And I'm sure that we could implement that during our strength and conditioning. And we might just periodize it through different times of the year to cope with different, to make sure we're changing up the stimulus. And that all costs 10 quid. So it would be possible even during our COVID. So that's all about maintaining momentum. And just to look at kind of like the key fast bowling indicator, the fast bowling key indicators. So the action is more likely to be kind of side on to a 45 degree. So how we classify this is at back foot contact, where are the hips and the shoulders pointing? If the shoulders and hips are pointing at 3 o'clock, then they're a side on action. If it's 1:30, it's a 45 degree action. If it's front on, the hips and shoulders are pointing forwards. A mixed action is where either at back foot contact, your hips are facing at 3 o'clock and your shoulders are facing at 1 o'clock, or the other way around. These are absolutely used in fast bowlers today. However, it can be a little bit tricky due to counter rotation. So the action is more likely to be side on or 45 degrees, and they're also going to have high gather. They're going to have stiffness in back foot contact. They're then going to use their muscles and obliques to sling, the muscles and the oblique sling to create rotational power to increase ball speed. Rotational power then comes from the extension of the rear leg and hip shoulder separation, which we'll talk about later. And that's why it's a difficult, dangerous position to access from front on. So if we're front on, our hips and shoulders are facing front on, and then we try to create shoulder hip separation, we're going to be counter rotating our body more than 20 degrees, which isn't safe and has been led to lower back injuries. We want a fast run up and then a brace front leg. So as you can see, more side on, it's a bent leg to absorb and create force, and we've got about 132 angle. So here we've got kind of two similar types of bowlers, and they've got fast ground contact times. As you can see, they're all under 201. The kind of software I've done this on is Canovia, fantastic software, but there are definitely faults in the next diagrams that I'm going to bring up. I filmed it on my phone and then just kind of had a bash with it on my computer. However, I think it leads to some good discussion points, so it's worth bringing up. So we've got a little bit of change in back foot contact. The knee angle from back foot contact. We've got some very straight with 171, 157s, to some quite a lot of bend, 123. But the main differences I wanted to bring up were the ability to help hyperextend the elbow. So these five here are all on the right hand side, and they can all hyperextend their elbow. Now this might not mean anything, but I just think that it's worth talking about. So these bowlers that I've mentioned on the right hand side of that graph, here are three of those examples. And a real key performance indicator for them is having that front hip above or in line with the rear hip. And that shows that they're really stiff at back foot contact. So they've got a very straight leg, they've got short ground contact times, and again, they're more likely to be 45 degree to front on and have a high gather. I mean, for pros for me, it's quite a simple way of bowling. They run up, they maintain momentum very well, and they sling it down. And they've got ultra efficiency due to great amounts of stiffness, and they've got fast whippy arm actions. The challenges are that you need lots of back foot stiffness to be able to control this. You need large ranges of shoulder motion through the shoulder and thoracic to get that arm round, because you're more front on, you need lots of ability to move that shoulder back. You also need the ability to hyperextend the elbow, in my opinion. And you also reduce the ability to use rotational power. Because you're more front on, you're more using the hip rather than the rotational sling, and that's where you gain your speed. So elbow hyperextension is been shown in a model to increase speed by 4% in a 20-degree elbow hyperextension. And as you can see, Jofra Archer, one of the fastest bowlers in the world at the moment, has a large amount of elbow hyperextension. I guess the question would be are we screening this? And if we did screen this, would we then channel them into this type of bowling, the more front on 45-degree bowler? But and then the other way, if they couldn't hyperextend their elbow, if they weren't very flexible, they weren't very mobile around the upper thoracic, then actually would we try and steer them away from this 45-degree front on action? And this might have its drawbacks. Jofra Archer got ruled out for having a stress fracture in his right elbow, and this hyperextension probably did lead to it, and sharp spikes and bowling load over the Ashes would have definitely contributed to that. But trying to just think about what we're trying to do all the time on back foot contact, and that is maintain momentum. I'm now going to try and describe different types of bowlers and what kind of changes might be here. So I wanted to add in some of the old rock stars with some serious pace and having a look, you've got Akhtar, Tate, Johnson, Thompson, Edwards, Lee. These guys got real pace. And as you can see, they then create this little group in the top left with a higher knee angle. So they bend their leg more at back foot contact, and they spend longer amounts of time on the floor in contact with the ground. Now, why is this? So I think you can group these kind of three types of bowler that I've talked about, and I don't want to try and group these two away from each other. The hip dominant, they're kind of the same, but I wanted to just make the point that one can hyperextend the elbow and the other doesn't. But you've kind of got this continuum between a back foot contact that's quite long and a back foot contact that's quite short. And these kind of impulses, if you remember this diagram here with the braking impulse and then the propulsion impulse, this is now probably softer because they are not creating as much force in so much time, but it's longer, and there might be more force within it because they're going to use that rear hip to, because they've got a knee bend, they can flex the knee and then extend it to create more force. And this is kind of your typical knee dominant bowler. And they often come across with a lot slingier action, and they're using more rotational power. So you can see really side on, and he's going to forcefully flick through. So just looking at some of the differences, you've got a large rotational component in your slinger knee dominant, but then you've got not much rotation in your hip dominant. You've got longer ground contact times, but you've got fast ground contact times in the other two. You've got a moderate knee bend in the left-hand side and a moderate knee bend in the right-hand, in the left-hand side again. So they're going to use probably a little bit of both. They're going to use that rotation from the slingers, but then also you're going to be creating lots of momentum like the fast bowlers right on the right-hand side. Now, I believe this is a continuum. I don't believe that you are completely one or the other. However, you do, as coaches, we should understand the differences and maybe channel bowlers into different techniques because they do have different nuances within them. But it's important to understand where you are and where you sit on that continuum. But essentially what these bowlers are doing is they've got a trade-off between losing momentum at back foot contact and creating a greater amount of rotational power. So they'll hit they'll hit back foot contact here. They'll lose momentum because they've kind of sagged on that back foot contact. They use more knee bend, but then that's going to make a huge increase in muscle contribution because they've got longer time to produce that force. And that's essentially how muscles act. We need longer amounts of time to create that force. And this comes down to the rotational power and the X factor. Now, I've done another webinar on the X factor, but this is the hip shoulder separation just before front foot contact, followed by a rapid acceleration of the kinetic chain. And that goes back to the conservation of momentum that we talked about right at the start, where the hips come through, the shoulder, the elbow, and then the wrist, and then the ball. And these kind of look like javelin throws. I mean, both actions look like javelin throws, but I think this is kind of more like a throw rather than the other one we've seen before. So I'll just show these two side by side. So I think you can already see kind of some similarities between the two, where they're really coming in and then slinging that arm over and creating huge amounts of velocity. And as we know, Sean Tate was one of the fastest bowlers in the world, and he's kind of your classical rotational power bowler. And it kind of looks like a throw to me. So what does a throw do? Well, we have a front foot block, and then the job of the front foot block is to create something to rotate around. The hips then rotate, accelerate as fast as they can, decelerate as the hips decelerate, the torso accelerates over the top, gets to its top speed, then decelerates, and this fires through a stretch shortening cycle of the elbow and the arm. Obviously, the difference in this one is that we can't extend our elbow. We have to keep it straight. But the same methods apply. It's accelerating, decelerating each component to create a stretch shortening cycle and a rapid ball velocity through the X factor. So these rotational bowlers, technically they usually land more side on to improve the opportunity for rotation. They're more commonly seen in the women's game, and this is due to reduced tendon stiffness due to increased estrogen levels. So these high amounts of estrogen reduce the collagen content of our tendons, and therefore women just don't have the same capacity to create reactive strength. So when that tendon hits the floor, the collagen acts as a sheath, and that kind of transfers all of the elastic energy, whereas they don't quite have the same collagen sheath, and so the collagen doesn't act in the same way, and therefore their tendons are less stiff, which lends them to using rotational power instead of maintaining momentum. So the questions are we coaching this kind of bowler? I haven't really seen one recently. Edwards is still around, however, he's 38 now. So how many bowlers are we teaching as a real rotational bowler? And if we knew this about women, would we then train these bowlers to bowl a certain way? And where are the priorities? Is back foot contact going to be our priority? Is stiffness going to be a priority? And if they were different types of bowlers, would you increase tendon stiffness training or rotational power training if you had to choose and you couldn't necessarily cover all bases? If we're looking to train the rotational athlete, we kind of go through the blocks of stability and mobility, getting large ranges of motion, then building strength upon them, and then rotational power upon them. And then making sure we practice our movements and always basing it around the fundamentals. For our stability, we're looking at anti-rotational core work, making sure we can resist rotation, flexion, lateral flexion, and extension. And this is going to be, this is linked with lower back pain and being able to support the core, support the body through a strong core. And this is going to help us transfer, the core acts as a conduit to transfer force from the feet to the hand, and making sure that sling works in the right way. Making sure we are forcing movements to the end ranges of motion. So we might be working on internal rotation, activation exercises of the rotator cuffs, for example, or we might be looking at overhead squats to increase that range of motion and the strength needed in those areas. Mobility, we want internal and external rotation around the hips and shoulders. The more we can rotate, it gives us a better opportunity to create an impulse and longer times to accelerate the ball. And better internal and external rotation is going to help with that. Mobility-wise, we want thoracic extension and rotation. So our joints stack with our hips needing mobility, our lower lumbar needing stability, our scapular our thoracic needing mobility, scapular stability, and then our shoulder in mobility again. Making sure we can extend the thoracic properly before we start to rotate it. Our strength, we're looking at our fundamental movement patterns, our hip hinge and our squats, and being strong in these areas. If we're moving the ball fast away from us, we're going to want a strong posterior chain to control those forces. We want a strong squat because that's going to help us in our acceleration and just making sure that we've got a strong base of fundamental movement. Our push and pull, the Ferris study saw that there was a correlation between pull-up strength and ball velocity, and this makes sense. The lat attaches on the sacrum and the erector spinae, comes and it attaches on the anterior side of our humerus, that's going to be the same action of moving the ball down in that kind of flexion plane. And then our power, we want a triple extension of the hip, knee and ankle on that rear foot. And we want to create rotational power using med balls. And so the triple extension will come through our things like power cleans and snatches, and our rotational power will come through forceful med ball throws. And again, just making sure we're practicing fast bowling, because the best way to get better at fast bowling is to fast bowl. So this is the position of, it's called the speed bolt, and this is fast bowling. So we have brace front leg, and then we've got our hips in line or in front at ball release, and this is our rotational power aspect. If we can get those hips to come through, decelerate, that shoulder comes through, that is our most efficient use of our kinetic chain. The trunk is flexed and that arm is delayed. So as you can see, optimal sequencing, and that's going to produce the fastest ball velocities. This is a good time to mention about alignment. I think for me, I would reverse engineer this position. If they're not getting to this position because they are crossing over too much, or that left, for a right-handed bowler, that left foot contact is too far on the right-hand side of the back foot contact, I would be looking at the speed bolt position. If they've got that speed bolt position from where they are, and they're not too much laterally flexed, I think you continue with it, but you probably won't see many bowlers going too far across themselves and then being able to get to that speed bolt position. But yeah, as I said, just making sure it's relevant to your bowler. So linear momentum and then muscle contribution. So this is kind of just the playoff between the two. So we've got our knee and rotational bowler in the orange. We've got our hip momentum bowler in the grey. We've got our muscle contributions in our dotted line, and our linear momentum in our blocked line. And this is just showing like you've got a longer time to create more muscle rotation force, whereas your hip dominant bowler is just going to have more linear momentum. And I believe that this line could be even higher than the hip bowler. From what I can see, they bowl faster, but then, you know, they both bowl. They're both very good ways of creating high amounts of energy, and I think it's dependent on the physiology of the bowler. So this is a really complicated looking slide, but I'm going to try and really break it down for you. So what am I talking about? What is the importance, and why does it matter for fast bowling coaches? So I believe that there are different biomechanical differences which could lend themselves to fundamental technical changes. So these bowlers you could consider potentially as like a knee dominant bowler. They've got that large flexion of the knee at back foot contact. They've got kind of slightly hard back foot contacts, but as you can see, they're fast bowlers. You've got most of the green squares are in this period here. But when the technical changes come, is you've got these kind of side on to 45 or very side on, and your front foot block doesn't become as important, it seems. These guys have also got like a high ankle height, so they really extend that leg down, up, out and down, and they've got moderate amounts of lateral flexion. So this X factor is this rotational component, and they've all got very large to high, sorry, I haven't used the same metric there, but large and high amounts of rotational force. But another difference is this low gather. And so we need to be making sure that we're aware of what kind of bowler they are, because then it's going to change where they gather the ball. And I know when I was coaching quite a few years ago, I teach everyone to put the ball in the same place, kind of under the chin. And having watched lots of cricket, no one really does that. You've got Stark here who puts it under the chin, but then you've got a real separation of people coming under and up. And we'll talk about that later. So I've kind of grouped them into two boxes here. We've got our muscle driven and potentially these tendon driven bowlers, and then we've got these like super tendon driven bowlers, almost the ones that can hyperextend their arm, which we saw earlier. And we've got this kind of continuum that shifts from being very side on to being more front on. You've got Bumrah and Stark being pretty front on, and then Archer and Steyn are kind of 45 degrees. This is a really rough estimate. I'm not saying that this is exactly what you should do, but if something wasn't quite going wrong, you might change it to suit the action type. But for example, Ralph is side on. So, I mean, they're not all the same, and there's definitely outliers everywhere. But again, you've got those hyperextenders in that box. And then just trying to demonstrate these different gather positions. So for example, Mark Wood, this is why I don't know where to put him, because he bowls side on, which would kind of, okay, we're thinking maybe rotational bowler. He's got quite a high knee, he's got a good amount of knee angle, but his back foot contact's really sharp, and he's got a high delivery. So could he be, you're right in the middle there? I'm not sure. So something else I wanted to talk about is that it seems as if you think that these guys on the right-hand side with their hyperextension have got large ranges of motion, they seem to not have to laterally flex as much as these bowlers in the middle. And my hypothesis would be that to gain the same rotational power and to create the same ball velocities that these people do, they have to find it from somewhere else because they don't quite have that range of motion. And so they're laterally flexing to create the same ball velocities. I thought something that would be an interesting comparison as well is just to have a look at how many overs people are bowling. So for example, and kind of the injury prediction of that. So Tate you would say bowl not many overs. So do these bowlers on the left-hand side break down more easily than the ones on the right? I'm not sure. I wouldn't be able to tell without any kind of statistics. But however, what I could say is that all these people on the right-hand side seem to be a lot younger than the people on the left-hand side. So have we stopped coaching it? And is there a difference in how we're starting to coach fast bowling now? And what predicted that change? Could it be the injury, or could it be something else? So just talking about the gather, so this is where I think definitely a change happens from this kind of slingier knee dominant bowler to hip dominant bowler. So in Brett Lee, he changed, this is him in 1998, I think, and this is 2006. And as you can see, he's got this high gather, which moves to a low gather. Now, I know he does kind of like pop it up, but mainly his gather is low. And this creates a larger arm pull. So this arm pull is kind of, as you can see here in the diagram on the bottom right here, it's that pull, almost like a javelin thrower. And the longer that arm pull is, the longer the amount of time he has to accelerate the ball in his hand and create a larger impulse, which kind of makes sense for what this guy's trying to do. He's trying to create lots and lots of force in a relatively large amount of time. But the high gather is associated with like a whippier fast arm action. So you'll see your Ralph Bumrahs, they've got their arm really high, and this creates a fast circumduction. So could these be potential guidelines of this continuum that might help coaches kind of think about coaching one way or the other? So I've just kind of broken these down into physical components and technical components. So if you've got a large rotational component, if you're a baseball pitcher as a youngster, might you try and put these guys down a slingier knee dominant path than a faster whippier action? The longer ground contact times, they're going to lend itself to different amount of tendon stiffness. So if they don't have that prerequisite tendon stiffness, would you put them into the slingier knee dominant pile? if they weren't very fast, if they struggled to create any momentum in their run up, would you then change it again? But you know, these people, everyone seems to have a fast run up, and that's been proven in the research again and again. But you know, I feel like these people are so efficient that they don't even run up that fast. You watch Ralph and Archer, they kind of just, they jog in at a speed that is so ultra efficient for them. But because they've got that large ranges of hypermobility, they can do that. The technical points are the different heights in the gather, in my opinion. And then you've got the side on continuum to front on. And again, this will be different for different bowlers. And the other difference is the high ankle. So are they clawing back the ground? Are they extending their leg out and then slamming down to create that front foot block? Or actually, are they just kind of stumbling in? As I've said, what's consistent with all of them is this speed bolt position. The rhythm in the run-up is always there. They've got a braced front leg, and there is a correlation in arm strength. So I'll try and break this down into some examples. We've got two people here that have got quite good tendon stiffness. They've got short ground contact times, and anecdotally, they've got quite a good training age, and they bowl with relative pace. They're not rapid, but certainly the one on the right is probably the quickest in our age group, certainly at the school and potentially in Surrey. And they've got quite good, they also play lots of sports, netball and hockey, and they just seem to be an all-round good athlete and have good back foot stiffness. We then go to these two, where they've either got quite a large amount of back foot collapse on the left, or they've got long ground contact times on the right. Anecdotally, they have kind of a lower training age than the other two, and they do bowl the ball a lot slower. So what options do we have here? Could we screen their physiology and say, look, you have a really low reactive strength index. You're never going to be someone that can maintain momentum at crease. We're going to channel you down into a hip dominant bowler. Or are we going to just try and develop that back leg stiffness using the protocols that we've mentioned? And this could hopefully improve their performance. Now, I'm also not being blind to the fact that they haven't got a braced front leg, and there might be lots of other performance metrics that you would go to first. However, this individual is a little bit different. He's got a slingier action, and bowls with considerable pace. He's certainly the fastest we've got at the school that I've seen. So would increasing back leg stiffness be a priority? I would say no, because he's got a slingy arm, a slingy action. But however, what you could say is that he's not extending that leg to the target, so we could work on that for him, and then creating a strong front leg brace. However, you know, we have seen in Tate and Akhtar that they don't have necessarily the most braced front leg. But we could also change the position of the gather. So like Brett Lee, he's got this high gather position because he's probably been taught that, whereas it might not actually be suiting his action to create that long arm pull and the fastest action that he could bowl with. So we've talked now at length about maintaining momentum and the differences that it might cause. We're now going to look at converting that linear momentum to angular momentum. Now this block of slides has got a lot less of ambiguity to it. The front leg brace has consistently been shown to improve ball speed. And it's kind of just Newton's first law, and this diagram shows it well. If you're going with velocity and then the bike stops because you've hit a wall, like this could be your front leg brace, your chest and your body is then going to rotate around and over the top, flexing over the top of that hip, that left hip, sorry, the front hip. So that rapid deceleration as the trunk flexes over the hip creates lots of speed, and the better the front leg brace, the more rigid that lever is going to be, and the better transfer of force you're going to have. But it also creates a longer lever length. So if we can create a really braced front leg, that's going to extend the amount of distance, the perpendicular distance from our foot to the ball, and that's going to increase ball speed. Kind of like think of a bus stopping. So if you were in a bus and then the bus stops, you automatically fall forwards, and it's just about adjusting, creating that with your front leg block. Going back to our diagrams, our force time graphs. A braking impulse has a positive correlation with ball speed. So King and Worthington Ranson found that the faster someone could decelerate on the front leg block, the more chance they had of delivering the ball with a fast velocity. And they also found that a large plant angle of 36 degrees was found. But just demonstrating the huge amounts of force that are going through that front leg brace, 4,800 newtons or 5.7 times body weight, huge amounts of force in 26 milliseconds. However, we have got the heel strike to provide a larger braking force, so that's going to help us. But still not undermining the fact that these are huge amounts of force and we need to prepare the body for it. Again, I haven't found lots of research on creating braking forces, but Damien Harper tweeted out a really great picture on what we currently know in braking in kind of football and other sports. And this diagram kind of shows it well, and I'll try and give a quick synopsis on the left. So the bowler understands when they will decelerate, so that is that helps in the braking load tolerance. The technical application of a heel strike to create a braking force, having a heel strike creates a larger impulse, as you've seen, and is a more efficient way of firing up the posterior chain and braking. We want to increase the pre-activation, so if we can get our hamstring and our hip to extend into the floor and claw back, and we can start switching on those muscles before impact, we're going to be more efficient at that movement. How can we practice that? Well, we can practice drop jumps, we can practice not drop jumps, sorry, but just kind of our jump and land techniques, jumping and rotating techniques, and that's going to help us activate that hamstring, and also just through practice. They've also found that hamstring and quadricep strength have helped in deceleration and eccentric quadricep strength, and we will look at that later on. So these two diagrams give us a good example of this heel strike. You can see in the bottom diagram, an excellent front leg bracer has a heel strike, whereas in the top, good ankle height. So you can see there's a nice high ankle height, which has been shown to be effective at creating a braking force. This is because it can then extend out and attack the floor down, and that will create a horizontal, like a diagonal force going straight through the body. And in this example, could we use a heel strike to improve the top bowler's ability to create a braking force? Just quickly, there's kind of these two different ways of creating a front leg block. We can extend the leg, or we can stumble into front foot contact. And again, I believe that this stumble will help that the bowlers on the right hand side, whereas on the left hand side, like our hip and knee dominant bowlers, but on the left hand side of that will benefit more from an extended front leg brace. And just to reiterate that 36 degrees is the most efficient. So I'm just going to try and give some details around how I would train this. So Wormgoor found no correlation between isokinetic knee flexion or extension in the eccentric or concentric phase and ball speed, but has been found in other braking research. So what does this mean? Is a front leg brace too fast for isokinetic dynamometry? So with the isokinetic dynamometry, it's 60 degrees per second that it's moving, and you're trying to resist or create that force. Whereas we need to create force in 26 milliseconds, so much more faster. The impulse needs to be far more rapid. So would isometrics be more relevant? The action clearly isn't moving through this front leg brace, so could it be more relevant? And would this influence our training protocol? And this diagram is just trying to show what that body's trying to do. So that hip is trying to extend with the hamstring to bring that foot back, and the knee is trying to resist flexion to try to stop going into this position. So the two types of isometrics are overcoming and yielding. Overcoming is to push against an immovable object, whereas yielding is to resist deformation under load. So you're counteracting gravity. So if you can imagine that ratchet strap in the first example, and then if you had a bar on your back, you went up onto a 2-heel calf raise, and then you dropped onto one heel. That would be kind of a yielding, because you're stopping the weight pushing you down. Again, and then just applying that to our front leg brace. Our knee is yielding flexion, our hip is overcoming flexion, and our hamstring, so hip extension is using the hip, hamstrings and glutes, because that hamstring is biarticular. So we've got overcoming flexion and extension. So our knee is stopping doing this, and our hip and hamstring are trying to move back, but because the floor's there, is actually isometric, and we're trying to overcome. How I would train this is in kind of 2 blocks. So one would be, the other thing is you're absorbing and creating horizontal and vertical forces. So we need to be aware of that and how that changes our training protocol. So in block 1, would kind of be like a building the capacity to do that. So simple movements like running 10 meters as fast as you can and braking. And then this could, just basic single leg jump and lands, nothing, too extraordinary. Having glute bridge holds, just trying to build that capacity again in that muscle, split leg hinge, just solid movements that we should be doing that are fundamental to creating strength. And then our block 2 might be a little bit more specific. So we run 10 meters and we'll only brake on the left leg or only brake on the right leg. And this is going to really test that eccentric strength in the hamstring. We then might make this a bit more specific. So we've got a box to box jump. So we've got that high reactive strength, and then we've got a single leg land once we jump off that next box. So I've given a quick video on these 3 isometrics, the tau RDL iso, ball stop jump, prone knee flexion, and these 3 examples here match these 3 here. So really specific to our fast bowling and that brace front leg. So we've now talked about our brace front leg, we've talked about the back foot contact, we've talked about the run up, and I just wanted to kind of quickly touch on, where is the priority? Now, all of these bowlers, especially at the lower levels, are going to have problems potentially with all of them and could all be improved. So we might just go for an all-round approach, trying to attack everything. But usually one person will have a priority. This is adapted from the Hurrian study that we looked at in the 2000s. And these are the kind of metrics that I've gone with, just to give a bit of an example of what potentially we could use as an intervention. So bowler C had the medium run up, so they weren't the fastest or the slowest. They had low vertical forces on back foot contact, so they didn't have to brake. They weren't creating a large braking force. They then created a high force, good front leg block, and they had the fastest ball speed. So even though we know that a faster run up creates best ball speed, they were more efficient through back foot contact and front foot contact, and therefore their resultant velocity was better. D had a slow run up speed, a high vertical force. So they had a high braking force, a low front foot block, and they were the slowest. No surprises there. But A, he ran in the fastest, but because he couldn't control his forces at back foot contact, and then his front leg block wasn't as effective, his speed was only moderate. And this leads us to a good example of what training interventions we would give to each one. So in bowler C, I would increase the run-up speed, see what effect that had. And if the ball speed kept on getting faster and the consistency was there, I think you just crack on, you let him run in faster. But what else could this bowler be holding back? They don't have any other skills. They can't bowl Yorkers. They can't bowl bouncers. They can't bowl an away swinger, in swinger, slower ball. There might be something completely different that we'd look for because their pace is actually all right. For D, I think you'd improve the run-up velocity first and improve the braking ability on the front foot contact. So you'd go for a bit more of a general approach, and you would hope that improving running velocity came with increased stiffness on back foot contact, because they've both got transferable skills. We don't need to train one independently of the other. However, with A, we can see that they're unable to absorb the forces in their run up. So we might get them to slow down, but really we want them to run in fast. So, you know, probably be a balance of the two, holding them back in the run up, but then increasing that back foot stiffness and the brace front leg, and hopefully they improve their ball speed. Coming to the end now, but the best way to bowl fast is by bowling fast and under no fatigue consistently. If you can do this season after season, month after month, you will be faster than you were. And you won't see a faster bowler you won't see a fast bowler that's got 1,000 overs under their belt. You won't see a sprinter come in, for example, who have really good tendon elastic energy. Without practice, they would not be able to bowl that ball fast, because there's so many components within the rotation and the linear momentum, which is so rare in sport to need both of them. Whereas you might get, you know, like a javelin throw, you feel like they could transfer quite quickly. But like in a baseball pitcher, they don't have to create that linear momentum. The linear momentum is smaller and the rotational aspect is huge. But how are we going to keep on bowling? Well, that reduce the chance of injury through slow and heavy strength training. By having slow, heavy strength training, we're going to improve our body's ability to be robust. We're going to keep that player on the part for longer, and that's going to make them a better player through sheer repetition. So what conclusions can we draw? A lot of questions in here, and I want to try and bring this to some kind of conclusion, but at the end of the day, there's still more research to be done. But there are different actions. People bowl differently. And they're going to have different actions side on to front on, and we may look to coach different technical points independently of one person. So we can't just say this is where you hold the ball. They might be different for different kind of actions. For S&C, does that mean that we're going to prescribe more rotational power versus tendon stiffness and stretch shortening cycle work? Probably, but I don't think we want to do too much of that. Bowling fast is the best way to improve skill and ball speed. So as much gym work that we do, as much pogos, anything that we do like that, that is going to be not improving our skill, because we're not going to be getting any better. So we want to be bowling the most amount that we can, which is safe for our body. And what do I mean by this? Well, I mean kind of not every day, it's every other day at max, with full days off, and bowling at max velocity, which is under long rest periods. And you're not going to be able to do that for more than 10 to 18 balls. And by that point, your nervous system's going to be tired, and then you're not going to need to bowl at full speed. You might then go and practice your skills or your technical aspects. Having the ability to hyperextend the elbow is an advantage, and we can see with the amount of fast balls that Jofra Archer's putting down, he clearly is showing that this is an advantage. So should we be screening this? And if we did screen it and we found out what we wanted to find, that they could hyperextend this elbow, would we then change their action? Which would be a question I would ask. Can we 100% say that back foot contact has an effect on ball speed? For me, it's not without the proper research. I haven't been able to find a paper that suggests that it is linked. Would our screening process inform our coaching? So would having a certain amount of reactive strength or a certain amount of speed or a certain amount of mobility, would that then try and make us channel a bowler down that path? If they don't want to, that's absolutely fine as well. They might feel that they don't need to get any faster. But if we felt there was a biomechanical advantage, and we know that biomechanics fuels human movement, then would we change them? I think research could be directed towards the effect of these variables on ball speed. So whereas at the moment we've got a lot on front leg bracing and lateral flexion, lower back injuries, I think we could look to try and see how see more studies look to increase ball speed and increase performance. So what is the back foot contact and knee angle of back foot contact? What could we find out something to do with that? And could they release anything around that? Depending on those contributions, what was the rotational power aspect that they had? Do these bowlers that have a longer arm pull, or a bit slingier, have they got increased time to ball release? You would say so, but this hasn't been necessarily found in the research because no one's tried to profile them. Does this change the position of the gather, and does this change the lateral flexion needed? And importantly, and this is kind of the largest point of the presentation, is that if we have found that there is a difference, if this is not just smoke and mirrors, this is actually, there are different types of bowlers, we need to change different technical aspects. And what does this mean for the previous research that's gone before us? Because actually it means that although we've been looking for similarities in bowlers, there are maybe distinct differences. So we need to put these bowlers into different piles and then create the research from there. Whereas if we're trying to compare apples and pears, then we're not going to be finding the results we want. Would this have an impact on fatigue or return to play protocol? So could GPS calculate an increase in rotational power, and could this be to a loss of momentum or back foot contact or a different energy leakage? Could this have stopped us losing the Ashes, which we definitely would have won if Anderson was fully fit? But his right calf was injured. He's a tendon-driven bowler, hip-driven bowler. Could we have calculated that his tendon stiffness on the right-hand side was, lacking, and he needed to have a rest? I thought I'd leave you with kind of a possible training intervention. So if we've got a bowler, and this is quite common at Kingston, they might have other commitments around this, but let's say you've got 2 gym sessions a week, 2 training sessions and a match. They're a rotational bowler, 17 years old, 4 years training age. I would keep the intensity quite high if we're in season. Reps 3 to 6, sets are quite low, and they've got a moderate amount of rest. So your 2 training sessions, you suggest you have a ramp warm up with some sprinting. I would start with a 3 times 50 meter sprint, getting that max velocity stimulus. You then try and do your max velocity bowling, and you might have your technical based session where you're working on different parts of their technique. In training 2, you'd look at their sprint and brake mechanics, their deceleration component, followed by a tactical based session and a tempo run, for example. The 2 gym sessions, basically split these into an upper and lower body. You'd start with your skipping to try and just keep that tendon stiffness. We don't need the stiffest tendons because we know they're a rotational bowler, but we want our power clean in there for a rotational power, that triple extension of the rear leg, which is going to be important. We've got our squat, hinge, single leg lunge, and again, hip hinge there. I actually thought they would run the other way, but that's fine. And then these are supersetted with our anti-extension, anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion, and then just working on that hip separation drill. Mobility at home would be your hip and shoulder internal, external rotation. And I've done videos on that before, and around thoracic extension and rotation. And then our second gym session would be our jump and lands. This could be our box to boxes, could be our single leg lands, just as a warm up. Our second bit of power might be our med ball throws. And then our upper body would be press up, pull up, landmine press, single arm row. And you'd superset these with our front leg brace program, which is the pro knee flexion, force off jumps, isometric car push for our stiffness. And we might do some rotator cuff help. On our match day prep, you've got the 6 balls of max velocity, med ball throws, jump and lands, and you've got a real micro dosing of sprinting in there just to keep them fresh, because it might be 4 or 5 days until they then go to their next session. If we had a momentum bowler, some of the changes that I might make, again, we've got those difference in technical. We've got some added skipping in there in training session 2. Our drop jumps instead of our power cleans, because we want that increased tendon stiffness. We've got our skipping in there as well. But you keep the contact time under 200 milliseconds because that's close to that back foot contact time. You've got double isometric calf exercises to increase that stiffness. You might be doing more shoulder health and elbow health because they've got larger rotation around there. And depending on how stiff they were, if you actually wanted to take some stiffness away because they were, potentially pulling up with injuries, you might include some long slow isometrics in there. With our med ball throws, we'll be using a lighter load because we want to increase that. We know that we've got less time to ball release, so we use a faster rotational element. But essentially the same with our squat, lunge, push, pull, anti-rotation, anti-extension, front leg brace program. This is basically the same session. With our match day prep, we might go through some pogos, jump and lands. Again, our minimal dosage of sprinting. So in summary, we want to create momentum during a fast, efficient and rhythmical run-up. We want to maintain momentum through a strong, stiff back foot contact that suits their action type. We want to convert linear momentum to angular momentum through an efficient front leg block. We want to create rotational power that is bespoke to your action. And then we want to bowl fast. And so that is the summary. Create, maintain, brace front leg, create rotational power, bowl fast. And you'll be absolutely right. There are some of my references. But thank you very much for listening. Again, I might look back at this presentation 5-10 years time and the research has completely changed. But I think this is certainly somewhere where kind of your Stephen Jones has gone. And as much as I don't think you need to go too much changing everyone's strength programs. I think there might be certain little adaptations which you make in the technical and physical preparation that could suit their bowling action more. Thank you very much, and I'll be sure to answer any questions.